Hello, my name is Natasha Richardson and I'm the founder of foragebotanicals.co.uk. Today I'm going to be showing you a basic introduction to the physical side of the hormone cycle which a woman usually experiences. Obviously, if you have any health problems that can affect your hormone cycle, so really this is like a stereotypical healthy woman's hormone cycle that we're looking at today. And although I do recognise that it affects you at lots of different levels, I want to just focus in on the physical signs today. And there are bigger kind of like things going on that I usually cover in a full-on workshop, but I want to make this a nice kind of short and sweet introduction. So let's have a little look. I'll share my screen with you guys. Okay, so getting to know your hormones, not just your period. So when we're at school, we're pretty much just taught about the period and we talk about the hormone cycle, but we really are just looking at the effects of the period and nothing outside of that. And it's only when women start to want to get pregnant do they realize that there are all these signs and symptoms that tell you about all the tiny little changes in hormones that a woman goes through each month. And they start to collect that. And we're going to look about how we can do that. And we're going to look at some tips on the easiest ways to do all of those things. So the hormones affect us at a physical level, a mental level, and a spiritual level. And today we're going to be looking at just that physical level at the top there. So by understanding the ebb and flow of the hormones and how they are linked to the symptoms you experience, you can begin to intuit which stage of your hormone cycle you are in. And this is something that will come with time and through practice of using the methods that we'll talk about today. Traditionally, the method that we are using today is called fertility awareness method. There are other methods that women have used to try and become pregnant, which we now understand are not as precise as the fertility awareness method that we're looking at today. So at school, we're taught about how our hormones give us periods, but there's so much more to just periods when it comes to a hormone cycle. And focusing on just the period is like learning about one season of the 4 that we have. So it's really like lopsided and actually often ends up being that you hone in on the negative aspect of a cycle, which has a lot of positive to it as well. So each season of the hormone cycle has signs and symptoms which help us track where we are. They are caused by the constantly changing hormones that we experience. So let's look at the different things that we can do to monitor where we're at. So there are signs and there are symptoms, and we're going to just look at the signs. Signs are things that our body does that tell us where we're at in our cycle. Symptoms are things that we experience. So signs are things that other people can observe in you. Symptoms are things that you would tell somebody else about. So the first one we're going to look at is the basal body temperature. The second one is the cervix position, and the third is the quality of the cervical mucus. So let's start with basal body temperature. Your basal body temperature is the temperature that you have anywhere in your body, actually, but I normally take my temperature in my mouth. Just as you have woken up, before you've done anything else, and I mean anything else, like you can't go pee and then come back and take your temperature. It doesn't work like that. And people get really like, people find that sometimes very difficult to take it in the morning, but I have some tips around that. So during our period and up to ovulation is called the follicular phase. After ovulation, your basal body temperature will increase, usually by 0.2 degrees. So you're looking for a really tiny change, and actually the charts that you use to monitor that change are on a really small scale, but it shows really clearly like what's happening, which is nice. And so once they've changed by 0.2 degrees and stay at that level, they don't drop down again. Once you've had a few days of it being at that level, you know that you have ovulated. The higher temperature helps making things comfy for the growing fetus. So as your progesterone levels go up after ovulation, the body is trying to get ready for potentially a little baby coming along. But if you haven't had sex and you've used contraception or whatever, and that's not happening, then the progesterone levels will drop off again and you'll end up getting a period. But in the meantime, your temperature rises regardless, just in case. So this is kind of the hormone cycles that we're used to seeing. I like this image in particular, and because it charts out, I should stop pointing and use my actual mouse probably. It shows how the body temperature is kind of like charted out. And I have to point out that when you look at basal body temperature charts, they show this kind of pattern that you can see here, but actually it juts about quite a bit usually, and that it's quite normal to do that. And what you're looking at here is more like a plot of the averages of how the temperatures lie on the chart. And underneath that, you can see that against the different hormones that we experience. So for me, the easiest one I find to look at is estrogen. Goes up steadily towards ovulation, hits a peak at ovulation, and then dips down. Where progesterone is really at a low all the way up until ovulation. Then it massively spikes along with your temperature, and that's it trying to support a potential pregnancy. When your body realizes that you aren't actually pregnant, it all drops off again, you have your period. So what you normally learn about at school is just kind of what's at the bottom here, which is an image of the womb, and it's building up its endometrial tissue and letting that go during menstruation. But like you can see, there's so much more going on here. So this is a typical chart that you might use to keep a record of your basal body temperature. And you can see that it's on a really small scale. You start at 35.5 and it goes up to just 37.4. And this down here is cycle day 1. So what you would do, cycle day 1 is the first day of your period. And you would start to take your temperature first thing in the morning and just jot down what you got by making your mark in whatever square is appropriate for cycle day 1. Then the second day, you come along and do it again in the next column, third day, and so on for as long as your cycle lasts. And you would start a new chart when you start your next period. The bits at the bottom here are also very important, but we're going to cover them afterwards in the next sections. I like these kind of like additional things at the top actually, like they encourage you to write down the time that you took your temperature, because actually just having taken it like 2 hours before your normal time that you take it will change it proportionately. So there are some calculators I know of that will change your temperature depending on what time you took it, so that if you do have an off day where you take it at the wrong time, it's supposed to calculate the difference. I don't really know how that could be scientifically accurate though. In as far as I'm concerned, I would much prefer to just scratch that day and take it the next at a similar time, and you'll figure out from kind of law of averages what direction it's headed in. So here's an example of one that's being filled out. So this is swapped onto Fahrenheit. This is quite like a common problem, actually, that a lot of the people that are doing this are American, so it's in Fahrenheit, but hey, you get the idea. So they've made a little dot where their temperature was on each day, and then they've like drawn them up to show the general pattern of things. Now, if you're using this to figure out your fertile time, which inevitably is information that you would come across just by using this method, you would look for this temperature shift. So what they've done is they've looked for a shift of 1, 2, 3.3 in this chart, and then they've counted 3 days after. And once it stayed at this 0.3 difference for 3 days, they know that they ovulated back where it shifted. And then there is a technique of drawing a cover line. I think this just basically makes it easier for you to see before and after ovulation. A cover line looks at your highest temperature. What do they count it as? The highest temperature you had after you stopped bleeding on this chart is what they've used. I don't fully understand like what this line is for. I usually, when I'm trying to figure out when I've ovulated, is just go off this temperature shift, and then I know that it happened around this time. But it gets more and more accurate the more signs that you combine it with. So like if you always keep track of your cervix position and you always keep track of the cervical mucus as well, then you combine all those signs together and you're more likely to have figured out when you ovulated. Admittedly, if you're using this to try and get pregnant, you realize that you're figuring this out after it's all happened. But when you've been doing it for a while, you start to get an idea of when it's going to happen, because you figure out that the body changes that you have before you ovulate are actually fairly predictable. There's like a big variety of what happens, but they're fairly predictable, and they can give you a concept of where you're headed. You'll also find that if you have regular length of cycle, that you tend to ovulate at the same time each cycle. But we used to assume that all women ovulated at, what do they used to say, like day 14 of the cycle or something. But it's not true. Women can ovulate at any point in the cycle, and women will ovulate at different points, just because we're all different and we're all individuals. What's really interesting, actually, is that they've now figured out that women can ovulate almost like on cue. So, like, if their husbands went away for a long period of time and they just returned, they can ovulate just because their husband was back, regardless of where they are in their cycle. So stuff like that is when people get caught out using the old mathematical methods of figuring out when they ovulate, because there's all these kind of like individual changes that happen that the mathematical methods couldn't equate for. And actually there are some phone apps that are supposed to figure out when you ovulate, and they're still using the mathematical method, and it's just not very accurate. This is much better. I know it looks a bit like overwhelming and confusing, but we're just focusing in on this top section that I'm highlighting in blue for the time being. Okay, so hopefully that's about as clear as mud. Essentially, you're taking your temperature in the morning and making dots. That's all you're doing at the moment, and then joining them up. Okay. Oh yeah, that's exactly what I was just saying, but we're just focusing in on the top bit. All right, let's have a little look then. These are my kind of checklist for taking your basal body temperature. So you must take it first thing in the morning before you do anything else. You must take it from the same place on your body each day. So if you start taking it in the mouth, always take it in the mouth. Don't switch over to like an armpit or something, because you'll get a slightly different reading. What I used to do, because I used to wake up and still do wake up at quite different times every day, what I used to do is set an alarm that I knew was going to go off like a good hour or 2 hours before I actually had to get up, because not everyone's like this, but I was able to grab a thermometer, put it in my mouth, kind of close my eyes, like half sleepily close my eyes with the thermometer in my mouth, and it would take my temperature, bleep, I'd take it out. Buy a thermometer that's got a memory on it, so you don't actually have to write anything down at that time. You're literally just like glancing over, grabbing a thermometer, putting it in your mouth, kind of falling asleep. It will make a little noise and you take it out. Then when you wake up later, you can write down what the reading was off the little memory chip that it has in it. The other thing that you'll need to do is get a thermometer, ideally with 2 decimal places on it. That adds another level of accuracy to your readings, which can be very nice and informative. And like I've already said, just get a thermometer that's got some memory on it. It's very useful. Okay, let's look at cervix position. So the cervix is like a little nubbin. I don't know how else to say. It's like, it looks a bit like a donut, actually, a lot of the time. And if you imagine a donut where the hole in the middle gets smaller and wider, closes and opens, that's... let me just share my screen. So yeah, this like closed and open donut is sort of what a cervix looks like when you look at it directly. Usually people think of it as like right at the top of the vagina, like it's like the vagina is this perfect tube and it sits right at the top of it, but it's not quite like that. We're kind of humans, we're a bit squishy and not so perfectly formed as like the cylinders that we think of in our heads. And actually often the cervix can be like off at a little angle, and you really have to just get in there, rummage around, figure out where it is for you. And what you'll find is that it changes through the cycle depending on your hormones. So it changes from high, soft and open when you're fertile, and then it will come down the vagina and it will feel low, which means it's much easier to feel, actually. It will be firm and closed. So the open and closed thing, you can't really feel that with the tip of your finger. We're talking about teeny tiny gaps here. But high and low you can feel, because the distance that there is of like how deep your finger has to go in, it quite quickly tells you how high up the cervix is. And soft and firm is quite easy. Usually people talk about how when it's soft, it feels like if you were poking your cheek, and when it's firm, it feels like if you were poking the tip of your nose. So the other thing that kind of can change where cervixes are is if a womb tilts forwards or backwards. That's not really something that people generally know about till they start trying to get pregnant and things, and it doesn't necessarily cause any problems at all. It's just another one of those things that is quite like a major anatomical feature that will change where your cervix position is. This is something that not everybody manages to get to grips with, literally, because cervixes are in different places. Nobody's taught you what they feel like, where they're at. And it would be really nice if this was something that like gynecologists taught everybody, like how to self-examine as part of their checkups, but it just not. I would really recommend looking at a website called beautifulcervix.com, where a woman has used a speculum to very easily gain more visibility to her cervix. So you can buy disposable speculums really cheaply, plastic. In fact, on beautifulcervix.com, she sells a kit there. So the speculum can be inserted, and you can use a mirror and a torch to have a little look every day if you want to. And that's a really nice way of getting to grips with what your cervix looks like in a normal instance. So if it changes, you can go and tell your gynecologist. You might not have had any other symptoms, and so it can be a nice way to potentially catch something really early on. And you don't have to be like a medical expert to know what's going on. And I'm sure there'll be quite a lot of people who would have like false positives where you think it doesn't look right and you go and check, but hey ho, you go and check and they'll probably tell you everything's fine. But it's quite a nice thing to take back to yourself and not always have as something that only your gynecologist can do. So when you're checking your cervix position, there are a few things that you need to do. Always choose the same position if you can each time. I would recommend like just squatting on the floor, or I think find it more comfortable to lift a leg up onto, like, I usually do it in the bathroom, so I'd lift my leg up onto the side of the bath, and try and use the same leg that I lift up each time. That gives me more of access to the cervix. You usually use your fingers, and if you want to be really like sterile, then you would wash them beforehand, because you never really know, you know, if you've been gardening or something, you don't know what kind of like microbes you might be introducing, and it's quite a delicate area. And I would recommend feeling it every day for months, so that you get an idea of what's normal for you, because actually it will change so much in a month. Like I said before, it's not always within reach for people, and that can be totally normal. So don't freak out if you can't find it, you can't feel it, that can be totally fine. And then if you really want to get to grips with it, using a speculum, a mirror, and a torch, like I recommended, and going to that website there, beautifulcervix.com. So this is where we get to this different section of the chart that we were looking at earlier. So down here, you see the word cervix, and it's previewing some symbols there quite on top of it. But basically, it gives you low, firm, closed at the bottom, high, soft, open at the top. And I think in this instance, they're encouraging you to fill it in black when it feels really firm and closed, and filling it in white as it starts to feel softer. And just moving up the chart as it gets to high, soft, and then coming back down again when it comes lower and firmer. And it looks like this person just felt for their cervix after the period had ended and stopped on like day 20, presumably because they knew at that point it's in that position now until after the period again. So they didn't bother to keep a record of it after that, which is totally fine and makes sense. You're going to have a lot more low and firm days than you will high and soft, probably, because your ovulation, the egg when you ovulate is only viable for 24 to 48 hours. But the fertile time that you have around that is much bigger because of the quality of the cervical mucus, which is what we'll talk about next. I'll just hold out. So the mucus that we get from our cervixes changes throughout the cycle for exactly the same reasons, hormones. So when you are in your fertile phase, it's usually long, stringy, stretchy, and often clear, and the Germans have a lovely name for it, Spinnbarkeit. When you're not fertile, it becomes more creamy, white, tacky, and there are lots of variations on this theme. We'll have a look at a chart in just a second. What's really interesting about it is that actually the mucus that you make when you are not in your fertile phase is like a web, and it catches sperm, and it's of a different pH, which makes it really difficult for the sperm to get anywhere and survive. And so when you're fertile, all of that web changes, it shifts to more like a ladder or a slide, makes it really easy for the sperm to go up the cervical mucus, and it changes its pH so that it actually sustains sperm. So if a man ejaculates outside of a woman, the sperm will only last for sometimes minutes and maybe up to like an hour. If he ejaculates inside of a woman during her non-fertile phase, we're not actually sure how long it might last. But if there's no egg around, it's not going to happen. Nothing's going to happen anyways, really. But if you're heading towards your fertile phase and you're starting to get more fertile mucus happening, then it's possible for the sperm to be kept alive for up to 5 days. And I've actually heard some people say 7 days, which is a very long time. So when people are trying to get pregnant, I usually tell them they don't have to be having sex every day. They don't have to be having sex every other day. Technically, if they have perfectly good fertile mucus, they only need to be having sex every 5 days, and by some people's standards, 7. So I find that very interesting, and maybe makes the kind of regimen, it's timed sex that people try to have when they're trying to conceive, maybe allows you a bit more freedom, which is nice. So the egg itself is only viable for around 24 to 48 hours. It's really all down to that cervical mucus and the environment in the vagina that allows the sperm to live so much longer and gives you that fertile phase, which is much longer on the charts that we've been looking at than just like 24, 48 hours. So this is your checklist for cervical mucus. Look, feel and smell it every day. This is so useful. Sometimes I find that women can smell if they're fertile or not after a while of getting to know their cervical mucus. So you can do this either by using your finger to take it from the vagina, or usually you can just see it in your underwear. So it's really quite easy to assess. The other thing to be aware of is that the mucus that you produce surrounding sexual arousal doesn't count. It comes to you because you're aroused, and it doesn't give you an indicator of where you're at with your fertility. Though I do find sometimes women find it very difficult to have sex when they're not fertile because they're already more dry. So this lovely chart is obviously just does the rounds. This is the only chart that I know that's as good as this, and it looks like it's been scanned out of a sex education book or something, because it's like darker on this side. Anyways, the examples that you see on the far left, this is like a column, and it's showing you varieties of dry or hardly any cervical mucus. Then as we go towards the more fertile, so not fertile at all on the left to fertile, like ovulating on the right, you go through like a sticky, crumbly, rubbery phase to creamy, lotion, milky phase to an egg, what they call egg white in America. This is what's called Spinnbarkeit in Germany. And so it took me ages to figure out this chart. I didn't realize that they were showing you different varieties of that stage of the hormone cycle and how it affects your mucus. And so some women will find that they hardly ever get this like really slippery, stringy stuff, but they do get almost like quite watery, slippery bits. And that's totally normal. If you find that you never get this kind of type of cervical mucus, or even that column of cervical mucus, you can potentially use herbs and make dietary and lifestyle changes to improve your cervical mucus. I've really seen drastic changes with some herbal medicine protocols that I've worked with patients who are infertile. And as they come into fertility, it all changes. So on the chart, this is under this section, cervical secretions. And again, it gives you a nice little visual moving from filling out each day when you're on your period to when it's dry or you feel like there's hardly any secretions, then getting more moist, cloudy, sticky. So again, it's giving you keywords and showing you variety of options till right at the top where you're wet, slippery, transparent, stretchy. Let's see if I have another one. No. Okay, so in a finished chart, you can see that the cervix position comes up to a peak around ovulation. You can see that that is matched with the cervical secretions that come up to a peak. And you can see how ovulation was quite likely to have happened like on day 15 of the cycle, just before the body temperature shifted towards that progesterone going up. So you can see how the temperature shift in this situation probably came a day after ovulation had happened. So you can't use temperature shifts to predict when you're going to ovulate until after you've been doing this for a while and you start to see patterns occurring. But you could easily be monitoring your cervix position and cervical secretions to see, like, hey, this is getting really slippery now. I can feel that my cervix is quite high and open. I must be approaching ovulation. So I would really encourage you to get charting if you're not already. If you are already, I hope this has been a nice reviser for you to look at any kind of like bits that you need some revision on. There is a lot to this, which I go into more depth when I do my full workshops on it. So you can look out for those workshops when they happen. And I'm planning on launching the workshop online as well, so that people will be able to do it at their own pace. And I'll be working in some, touch time as well, especially in the Facebook group. Okay, so I would recommend that you download a chart to monitor your cycle on. The ones that I downloaded are from, I had the book out earlier. If you Google fertility awareness method chart, they'll come up. The other thing that you can do is look up lots of apps. There are some really nice ones on Apple, but do double check whether they're using the mathematical method or the fertility awareness method that we've been talking about today. The other thing that you want to be doing, the second thing, is going out and buying your equipment. And that could be as little as just getting the thermometer so that you can take a temperature. It could be as much as also ordering a cervix position kit from beautifulcervix.com. And then the third thing, final thing, is to share your findings. I would love for us to share on the Facebook group Herbs for Women together. So it's called Herbs for Women. You'll find it on Facebook. I'm the admin, so I'll add you once you've put in your request. And it'll be so nice for us to start sharing where we're at in our cycles. So let me go back. So yeah, this is an invitation really. I want to put up a regular post where I'm asking you guys to share what phase of the cycle you're in, whether you're in like between your period and ovulating, or if you're in a more of an ovulation phase, or if you're shifting towards your period. I'd love to know, and I'd love to know what your experience of the cycle has been. Welcome you to share your experiences and have a chat really about how each cycle has gone, and maybe I can make some suggestions with herbs that might improve your cycles as we go forwards. So I hope you've enjoyed today, and feel free to share the video with whoever you think will benefit from it. Bye.